There is a mechanism I have been sitting with for a while before bringing it into this space. The mechanism itself isn't difficult to understand. What gave me pause is that its implications point directly at a procedure that many people watching this are currently paying for. One that works accurately for what it addresses, but cannot address what I'm about to show you. This is an investigation. It began in clinical practice with a pattern that refused to resolve into any standard explanation I had available. I'm going to take you through it the way it actually unfolded, through the clues as they arrived, through a false lead that had to be ruled out, and through the moment the actual mechanism became clear. The case that opened the investigation looked like this. 2 patients presenting within the same period, both with pronounced crow's feet, lateral orbital lines, radiating from the outer corner of the eye. The first had spent decades in an outdoor profession with limited UV protection, fair complexion, measurable photo damage. The expected presentation. The second wore prescription UV blocking eyewear from her early 30s onward, worked predominantly indoors, Mediterranean complexion, negligible photo damage in that lateral orbital region by any clinical measure. Nearly identical crow's feet, same radiating distribution, similar depth at the lateral corner, and both of them showing more pronounced lines on the right side than the left. That asymmetry is what stayed with me. 2 people with opposite histories, opposite sun exposure, opposite skin types, opposite occupational environments, sharing the same directional asymmetry. Every single time a pattern appears across cases with opposing causal variables, it signals something. Not a diagnosis, a question. What is the shared variable that neither history accounts for? The photo damage story couldn't explain it. The expression story, the orbicularis oculi firing through blinking and smiling, couldn't account for the laterality. Expression is bilateral. Both eyes blink at the same rate. Both sides respond to the same emotions. If the cause were exclusively muscular repetition and UV exposure, you'd expect a roughly symmetric result. You frequently don't get one. So I began looking somewhere other than the crow's feet themselves. The first clue came from a direction that surprised me. Not from a recent study, not from imaging data, from medical traditions that predated modern anatomical knowledge by centuries and had been observing something that their theoretical frameworks tried to explain in the vocabulary they had available. In traditional Chinese medicine, there is an acupressure point designated Tai Yang. Its location is precise, lateral to the eyebrow, in the slight hollow at the side of the skull, at the temple. Classical texts cite it for eye fatigue, tension behind the eye, headache originating near the orbit, and what older clinical descriptions translate as diminishment or change in the outer eye region. Practitioners working 2,000 years before the superficial musculo-aponeurotic system was named, before any knowledge of facial fascia as a distinct tissue structure, were consistently directing intervention at the temple for lateral orbital concerns. Not at the eye, at the temple. Ayurvedic medicine identifies the Shankha marma at the lateral cranium and Stapani at the temple region as primary points in facial rejuvenation protocols targeting the lateral eye area. Again, not the periorbital tissue directly, the temple. Traditional Thai massage incorporates sustained temporal compression as a component of facial work, specifically described as affecting the outer eye region. Kobido, the Japanese facial massage tradition documented from the 15th century, uses the temporal zone as a primary treatment site when the therapeutic goal involves the lateral orbital area. Practitioners working from lineage rather than anatomy across 500 years of generations, returning to the same location. And in 19th century European beauty medicine, before injectable cosmetics existed, before synthetic skincare compounds, popular beauty manuals from England, France, and Germany were recommending temple massage as the intervention for lateral facial aging around the eyes. Not under eye massage, temple massage. This appears in texts from the 1870s and 1880s, written for ordinary women, not medical practitioners, describing an empirically observed connection between the temple region and the lateral eye's appearance. 5 independent traditions, different continents, different centuries, different theoretical frameworks, no shared anatomical vocabulary. All of them arriving at the same anatomical location as the relevant site for the lateral orbital region. That's not coincidence, that's a signal. Always. When independent observation systems converge on the same location without sharing a mechanism for why it works, they are typically tracking a real functional relationship that their particular language tries to explain. The investigation had its first clue. But a good investigation doesn't leap from a clue to a conclusion. It tests the obvious alternative first, rules it out properly before proceeding. The standard explanation for crow's feet deserves to be stated accurately and given full credit before it's questioned. UV radiation degrades collagen and elastin in the lateral periorbital skin, a region that is structurally thin, relatively unsupported by underlying fat compartments, and particularly vulnerable to photo damage over time. Simultaneously, the orbicularis oculi, the circular muscle that encircles the eye, contracts with every blink, every smile, every squint. Somewhere between 12 and 20,000 contractions per day. Over 30 years, the skin has been folded along those same lines tens of millions of times. The result is a permanent crease. This is genuine biology. I accept it. The evidence for it is solid, but the model cannot answer three specific questions. And in an investigation, the questions a model can't answer are where the productive work begins. First, why are crow's feet frequently more pronounced on one side of the face in people with symmetrical UV exposure and no obvious asymmetry in their facial expression habits? Bilateral causes should produce roughly bilateral effects. They often don't. The asymmetry needs an explanation. Second, why does the lateral orbital line appear with particular focus in people who have maintained consistent UV protection since early adulthood, have well-corrected vision with documented low habitual squinting, and show genuinely good skin preservation on the forehead, cheeks, and under eye area? The localization to the lateral corner is too specific for a generalized aging effect to explain cleanly. Third, and this one requires the most attention. In patients who receive Botox to the lateral orbital region, why does the area immediately superior and lateral to the treated zone begin developing lines that weren't visibly prominent before? The treated zone quiets. The orbicularis relaxes in that region. Adjacent untreated tissue begins to show lines at the boundary. If the sole mechanism were the orbicularis muscle, which Botox addresses accurately, that boundary effect should be less consistent. But it's not rare, it's a pattern. Something is loading that adjacent tissue, something that continues regardless of what happens to the orbital muscle directly. The conventional explanation handles what it handles. These three observations require a different mechanism running alongside it, one the standard model was never designed to see. Loaded is the word, not rigid. Contracted isn't quite right either. The temporalis runs loaded. And the best way to understand what that loading does to the surrounding tissue before the anatomy is probably not anatomical at all. If someone at a dinner table asked you to explain what years of sustained low-grade muscle tension does to the connective tissue attached to it, not a cramp, not a clinical contraction, just background activation that never fully releases, what would you reach for? The most natural comparison isn't biological, it's financial. Think about compound interest, but accruing against you. Every day, the temporalis maintains subclinical activation, the kind of quiet jaw tone most people carry through hours of focused screen work or reading. Not clenching, simply not fully releasing. It places a small mechanical load on the fascial tissue covering and surrounding it. Any single day's contribution is negligible, essentially immeasurable. But 15 years of 10-hour workdays at even low-level sustained temporalis activity represents compound interest accumulating against a structural account. The fascial planes that should glide past each other with relative freedom begin losing that mobility. Planes with reduced mobility transmit mechanical force differently, more directly, less distributed, less capable of absorbing load through adjacent tissue. That change in transmission is what eventually becomes visible at the surface. Small payments made daily against a structural account. And the account, unlike a savings account, doesn't compound in your favor. The second thing you probably reach for at that dinner table is thermal. The temporalis isn't a burst contraction muscle. It runs warm, continuously, like a low output furnace that nobody thought to modulate. Sustained low heat, nothing acute, nothing that registers as injury, changes the material around it over time. Connective tissue adjacent to a chronically warm, chronically activated muscle does not remain mechanically identical to tissue neighboring a resting one. The material properties shift gradually. The way force transmits through it shifts, and those shifts, accumulated across years, show up at the point of least structural resistance, which in this region is the lateral orbital rim. Compounding structural debt, a furnace that was never turned off. Those two frames describe the mechanism at conversational resolution. The anatomy makes it precise. Let me give you the anatomy. Actually, no. The load path makes considerably more sense if I show you where the force arrives, before I trace it backward to where it originates. Start at the orbital rim, then walk upstream. The lateral orbital rim, the bony edge beside the outer corner of the eye. Thin skin above it, relatively limited fat cushioning. The orbicularis oculi loading it from below and medially with every expression. This is the site where crow's feet form. The tissue here is already working under real mechanical demand. Now add a second input, arriving from above and slightly lateral. Different direction, different source. Both landing in the same place. Where does the second input originate? The temporalis muscle. Fan-shaped, covering the temporal fossa, the curved bony depression at the side of the skull, above and slightly in front of the ear. Its fibers originate from the temporal bone and converge downward to insert into the coronoid process of the mandible, the upward jaw projection. It is a primary jaw closing muscle. It also activates during sustained cognitive effort, the mild jaw tone most people maintain during concentration, reading, or screen-based work. Not clenching, the absence of full release. That distinction matters because it means the temporalis is active for the duration of any focused mental task, often for hours, at a level that produces no conscious awareness of tension. The temporalis is covered by a fascial layer, the temporoparietal fascia, continuous with the superficial temporal fascia, that does not end at the muscle's boundary. It connects upward with the gallia aponeurotica covering the cranium, and transitions inferiorly into the SMAS, the superficial musculo-aponeurotic system. The SMAS is the tissue plane that surgeons address during facelift procedures. It runs through the facial soft tissue, connecting the facial muscles and the structural tissue above them. And it anchors among several locations at the lateral orbital rim. Temporalis, temporoparietal fascia, SMAS, lateral orbital rim. That path is anatomically direct. When the temporalis is chronically loaded, it creates tension in its fascial covering. That tension transmits toward the orbital rim, arriving from above and laterally, perpendicular to the expression-driven loading from the orbicularis below. Two mechanical inputs, different directions, one address. The asymmetry in screen workers reflects asymmetric temporalis loading. A right-handed individual who angles slightly rightward during concentrated work, whose mouse sits at the right, whose habitual reading posture favors the right, that person loads the right temporalis differently over years. Not dramatically, subtly. The differential is small per day. Over a decade, the cumulative difference in lateral orbital loading between sides becomes visible. The pattern in people with excellent UV protection reflects temporal fascial tension operating independently of photo damage. The Botox boundary effect reflects the temporal component continuing after the orbicularis component has been reduced. And in some cases, the orbicularis had been providing counter tension against the temporal load that is now post-treatment absent. 3 clues, 1 mechanism. The investigation ends at the temporalis, which means the intervention belongs there as well. 1 technique, Not a sequence, not a multi-step routine, not a phase system. The minimum affected intervention at the upstream source. The single input that changes what nothing downstream is reaching, the temporal fossa. 2 fingers placed on the side of the skull, above and slightly behind the outer corner of your eye, just forward of where the hairline meets the temple. There's a slight bony concavity there. That's the anatomical landmark. The temporalis lies beneath the skin at that location, under its fascial covering. 2 fingers, firm circular pressure, not uncomfortable. The objective is neuromuscular release through sustained mechanical input, not tissue disruption. 20 seconds per side. Start on the side where your jaw feels tighter at rest. For most people, this corresponds to the side with more pronounced lateral orbital lines. That correlation is the mechanism expressing itself, and it tells you something worth knowing. Do this in the morning, before anything else contacts your face, before cleanser, before sunscreen, before any other practice. The tissue is completing overnight remodeling from the prior day's load. Morning is when the fascial system is most receptive to mechanical input that competes with the day's pattern. In the first week, what you'll notice won't be visual. You're not going to see a change at the lateral corner of the eye in 7 days. What you'll notice is jaw release, a measurable softening of the jaw musculature on the side you started with, within a minute or 2 of finishing. Sometimes a sense of decompression near the outer corner of the eye. Sometimes a slight reduction in the feeling of facial tension that you may not have registered as tension until it lifts. These functional responses tell you the temporalis fascial system is responding to mechanical input. That's the confirmation. Let me be clear about what I'm not claiming. The timeline and degree of visible change are not uniform. They depend on individual tissue quality, the duration of prior loading, and what proportion of the visible crow's feet pattern is temporalis driven versus orbicularis driven versus photo damage. I would be misrepresenting the evidence if I suggested otherwise, and I'm not going to do that. What I can tell you is that for individuals carrying significant temporal fascial tension, this reaches a source that no topical product, no injectable, and no facial massage protocol directed at the orbital region is addressing. The orbicularis interventions are accurate. They just have a different address than the temporalis. There is a specific kind of person who, after understanding where a visible pattern originates, decides to work at the source rather than the surface. That person is now positioned differently than most people sitting across from an injector who has never mentioned the word temporalis. If thinking upstream, tracing where the load originates rather than managing where it appears, is how you approach your body, that's the orientation this channel maintains. The temporalis is one of several muscles whose chronic loading drives surface changes that consistently get addressed at the wrong location. This is one investigation. There are others worth running. Tonight. 2 fingers at the temporal fossa, just forward of the hairline at the temple. 20 seconds per side. Begin on the side where your jaw feels tighter. Notice whether your jaw releases on the side you started with. That response is your evidence.